So in 2024, almost half of the world's population is going to be going to the polling stations to decide on their next elected leadership. And of course, that includes, well, likelihood us in the UK and also over the pond in the States. So in this video, what I want to do is have a look at what the narrative is going to be as we run into the election cycle, how to be aware of what are going to be probably some damn outright lies that come out of the politicians' mouths over the next 6 to 12 months. And how is that going to affect the property market so we can start to have an understanding of where things are going to go in 2024. So what I want this session to be, again, is more of a discussion session. I'm going to sort of pose some concepts and some thoughts here, and I want us to get into a discussion. So if you're on the live, a very good evening to you, or late afternoon. I hope you're feeling good after the reveries of last night. Of course, it was New Year's Eve. So please do play all out and get involved in the conversation. If you're watching on the replay, as always, put your comments in and your thoughts in the replay, and I'll always come back to you and get them answered. Now, as we are live, if you can hear and see me, please give me a thumbs up, and please find something in the comments box that you can comment so I know that we're all here and we're paying attention. Okay, so I don't want to sort of have too much preamble this evening, because I know everybody is probably, Bank Holiday Monday vibes, getting ready to go back to work tomorrow. But I want to head straight in to some concepts about misinformation, because over the last however many, I would say the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen a massive rise in AI. If you haven't heard of AI or artificial intelligence, you've probably been sort of living under a rock somewhere. But we've seen such a proliferation of artificial intelligence and the impact that can have on information, especially these large language models like ChatGPT. I wanted to show you this. I mean, we're talking about some serious potential existential, I can't speak, it wasn't even a late night last night, existential threats to humanity that AI and artificial intelligence can bring. But I don't want to go to sort of doomsday here. I just want to talk about the applications of artificial intelligence on potentially spreading misinformation and propaganda to the masses. This was actually an article that I found as I was researching today's session, where it said the type of AI system used by ChatGPT and other chatbots have raised fears that AI could soon be used at scale to spread misinformation and propaganda, or that it could eliminate millions of white-collar jobs. Now, I want to focus on this bit, this spread of misinformation and propaganda. Okay, the ability to use misinformation and propaganda is not a new concept. It's been used through history, for many reasons. It's very obvious that the ability for artificial intelligence to be leveraged by bad actors in our world is there. I mean, it's been years since I left the military, but even when I left the military 10 years ago, we were talking about the biggest threats, rather than being conventional warfare, are actually cyber warfare. And I believe sort of artificial intelligence and the spread of misinformation has very much come into the forefront of that over the last 2 or 3 years. But we very much look at it, artificial intelligence, as the threat from bad actors. But actually, what is the threat from artificial intelligence and misinformation? Internally, from our own governments, our own politicians, our own organizations, who are using these extremely advanced algorithms to very rapidly spread a narrative that they want to spread. And if nobody has sort of been paying attention to the rise of artificial intelligence, this is something that I'm going to be focusing on this year. I'm going to be doing some sort of courses and training on it and how we can apply it into things like the property world, but also on a bigger sort of level. I think it's something that everybody needs to be aware of, because right now we live in a world where anybody can get hold of a large language model like ChatGPT and get it to create a narrative of false information, and with a click of a button, spread that in hundreds, if not thousands of outlets, it could be news outlets, media outlets, social media outlets, YouTubers, like me, just very quickly spread this misinformation all over the place. And that has the ability to influence people at a very effective scale. And the reason I'm sort of bringing it into this discussion is you go back and look at the last election, you go back and especially the American election with Trump going in, and looking at how effectively things like social media was used in those elections to influence the electorate. And it's been 10 years since I started playing around with marketing and be able to use platforms like Facebook to directly target people based on their interests and behaviors on social media to put a very powerful message in front of people. And if I can do it sitting in a basement, in my home with such accuracy, imagine what governments can do, with the very best sort of, copywriters, storytellers, programmers out there. So it's very obvious to me that this year we're going to see a lot of interesting narratives and a lot of interesting stuff going on that I would suggest that vast majority of us are not going to be aware of. And I want to highlight it to sort of, almost build an awareness of not everything that we see is going to be true. And we've been speaking about it for months now and looking at the conflicting messages that comes out on mainstream media, mass media, government, politicians, mouths, and then looking at the actual data. And this is all something called PSYOPs. Again, a military term. PSYOPs is psychological operations. And effectively, it's the most powerful way to move and influence nations is not things like conventional warfare, right, which is just basically a very crude way of influence, but actually psychological warfare, psychological operations has the ability to insidiously influence people, especially a mass electorate. Okay, so when we see headlines like this, that came out, Hunter claims UK has turned a corner as he slashes national insurance, right? Just before we see the updated GDP figures that came out before Christmas, you go, right, we need to be aware of headlines, what publications, what bias they have, where is this being spread from? I took this today from my news feed and just screenshotted it, right? And we can see three separate headlines here. The Guardian saying signals are flashing red for Rishi Sunak's economic growth pledge. Of course, The Guardian is a very pro-left-wing publication. Then we've got Telegraph and Evening Standard, very pro-right-wing, saying Britain to outgrow Germany for years to come as Eurozone growth engine stutters and UK economy set to escape 2024, hard landing in boost for Sunak. So immediately, just one snapshot of headlines in a news feed gives completely contrasting narratives, and depending on where your bias sits, right, this is going to directly affect you, your thought process, and how you, not just how you vote, but how you invest, how you live your life, and how we let others control us. So I think this is a really important thing to be aware of. And by the way, just to prove the point on this, these three headlines are all from different dates over the last 3 weeks. I just very simply cut and paste the 4 days ago, so it looks like they're all from one news feed 4 days ago, but in reality they're not. And again, that took me about 30 seconds to do. So these are not difficult things for people to do to actually influence. Okay, so let's talk about and let's flick over. In fact, before we do that, what I would like to do is go through some data of where we are in this election run-up, where the voters sit right now as we go into the 1st of January or into January 2024, but also where the election is going to be battled, right? What the main sort of fighting points and fighting areas on this election are going to be, and how that is going to affect government policy, and how that government policy is going to affect you, right, when you're looking to invest or buy houses. Okay, so important. I do think we're going to see some big changes this year, or some big policy. Before we do that, it is the new year. I have one aim, and that is to hit 5,000 subscribers within 1 year of launching this channel. When I launched the channel, every video I saw said, look, you need to aim for 1,000 in your first year. We're on track to hit 5,000. If we could hit that, it would absolutely make my 2024. So please, if I could ask for 30 seconds of your time to explain why I do this channel, how it benefits you, and how you could help me hit that milestone. I'll see you in 30 seconds. For those of you who are regulars, you'll know that I'm fascinated by data. And when I look at the channel stats, I can see that just under 65% of people who watch my videos aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Now, I do know this stat is actually way above the average for YouTube and shows the power of the community that we're building here. But I want to do better, and I'd like to make a deal with you. I've got a vision to empower as many people as possible on this planet to take ownership of their futures using income-producing assets to reclaim your time, freedom, and choice. And if you can just hit that subscribe button, I'll work tirelessly to grow this channel, make it better and better for you so we can fulfill that vision together. I cannot tell you how much it helps. As the channel gets bigger, I can put more resources behind it, improve the production, the content, and ultimately the value that I give to you. So if you could do me that small favor and hit that subscribe button now, as well as the like button on this video, it would mean so much to me as we continue to grow this community together. It's the only favor I'll ever ask you. Thank you, and let's get back to the episode. Thank you very much. Just hit that subscribe button now. And by the way, I can see lots of comments coming in. Happy New Year to everybody. I'll go through the comments at the end, as I always do, so we can get through the content for people watching on the replay. So let's have a look at where we are with the voting electorate right now. You can see, I probably shouldn't need to explain this, but just in case, blue is Conservative and red is Labour. Things are not looking too great for Conservatives right now. Big gap, however. Labour is starting to go on a little slippery slope and have been for most of 2023. So I take these sort of headline voting intentions with a pinch of salt, because of course when we actually get to vote, because of the system that we have, it's not just as clear cut as 41%, 24%, right? First past the post does some funny things. We can see that actually we've got a drop in support for both Labour and Conservative over the last 6 months, and sort of a big increase both with Green and Reform, which of course is the old Brexit party. So a bit of a swell with that. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes over the next few months. But what I really want to look at here, okay, because the Tories are lagging behind horrifically, and everybody thinks it's going to be a slam dunk, and Labour have got an open goal here. I think when we look at figures like this, the voting party, the voting electorate are saying, actually, we don't particularly like either. It feels to me like we need change. I personally, I don't like to go political on this. I don't want to give you my views, but I feel neither party is fit for purpose in terms of the modern society, and we need something that's different, something that is a change. But we're not going to get it. Let's just have a look at the main sort of aspects, if you like, that this election are going to be thought of. And right now, you can see the number one by quite a long way is reducing inflation and the high cost of living, okay? That is the biggest thing that this election is going to be battled on. And therefore, it's pretty obvious, right, the policies that are going to come out in the next budget and the narrative that we hear over the next 3 to 6 months are all going to be about reducing inflation and affordability for people. Now, these are things that we've been speaking about so much over the last few months, right? And there's been a massive shock and a massive surprise, especially by me, when you look at the drop in inflation figures that we've had over the last 2 months. We've seen way above forecast drop in inflation, and we've dived into those figures and questioned them, right? And we've come up with some interesting piece of analysis with how things are going with inflation. And for me, we've got one of two scenarios happening. Number one, these inflation figures dropping as quickly as are actually happening. And if they are, then it looks like we'll be on course to potentially overshoot target and go into a deflationary sort of economic environment. The second is that these rapid drops in inflation are actually a load of hoop, right? And there's some quite significant manipulation of the figures to be showing this, especially when you start looking at things like the weightings of utilities in the CPI basket. So that's the increased weighting of utilities, decreased weighting of owner-occupier housing costs, which basically means with utilities coming down, that's going to have more of a skew, and owner-occupier housing costs going up, it's going to have less of an impact on CPI because of those weightings, okay? So that's something that's interesting. So we need to stay on track of what's going on with these inflation figures, because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, right, if the Tories are going to be fighting this on inflation and cost of living, then they want it to come down as quickly as possible. Right, let's look at another thing that I found that I thought was fascinating in terms of where people's minds are right now. Now, this is a poll on effectively people in swing battleground, swing states. I know we're not in America. Swing counties. What do we call it? Battleground constituencies. Okay, who intend to vote for either Conservative, Labour, or Liberal Democrat, and why they vote for that particular party. So if you look at this, right, in these battlegrounds, 48% of people who say at the moment they're going to vote for Conservative say it because they dislike the other parties more. So nothing to do with their policies, just the fact that they don't want to vote for Labour or Lib Dem or anybody else. And we also have that as the top thing for the Lib Dems, that people are voting for Lib Dems because they don't want to vote for Conservative or Labour. That to me is actually staggering. For Labour, the main reason that people are voting for Labour are because of their cost of living policies, okay? So again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that if you are Conservative, right, and you want to go in and start to try and take the market share in these battlegrounds from Labour and take it over here, what we need to do is, first of all, polarise more, effectively dismantle Labour in terms of perception, right? We've got people voting Conservative because they don't want to vote for everybody else. So they're going to be undermining Labour, dismantling them, in whatever way, social media, whatever, to get them over, but also to be quite aggressive on this cost of living policy and to be that sort of shining white knight to save the cost of living. So if I was a Tory right now, by the way, as we go through this, I'd love if you put in your thoughts on what you would do if you were going into this election cycle and you were choosing on where to fight this and what your policies would be. What would I be doing if I was a Tory right now and had that sort of death grip on power? Because everybody's writing them off, okay? Everybody's like, there's absolutely no chance, open goal for Labour. But please do not underestimate the power or the desire of people in power not to relinquish that power, okay? So they'll be thinking right now in their strategic war rooms, if you like, what they're going to be doing to fight this election. And it's going to impact us. So what would I do? Well, number one, I would want to be that white knight, okay? So I would want to be standing up when we go into election proper, saying we have saved the economy, right? With all of these huge, horrible inflation, awful affordability crisis, we as the Tories have come and saved this. Now, of course, it doesn't matter that was all caused by their policies in the first place, because that would be old news. But they want to come in and be the white knight. So first thing they're going to want to do is to beat inflation. And when we have a look at the headline inflation, and don't forget, right, the headline inflation, sorry, let me zoom out on that, is CPI. So everybody talks about CPI, which is effectively inflation with the housing cost stripped out, which is a really bizarre metric that we use to assess where we are right now with inflation, because for most people, for the average person, the average UK resident, the majority of your costs are going to be housing, right? Shelter, your rent, your mortgage, and then probably your food, right? So I don't know why we strip out the housing, because it's the thing that actually matters for most people. However, if we see CPI and CPIH, they are, of course, coming down very rapidly. And this is where the headlines are. What the headlines don't talk about so much, right, is this line here, which is effectively our housing costs, owner-occupied housing costs. And yes, there was a very, very tiny blip down in December, but we've talked about the skew of weightings and how in 2023 they changed the weightings of the utilities up, housing down. So actually the fact that utilities have come down, and we'll talk about utilities in a bit, by the way, the fact that utilities have come down, okay, is going to accelerate the drop in CPI, and the fact that housing has gone up in terms of rents going up, double-digit rent growth, mortgages going up, is not going to have that same sort of impact. So headlines, CPI are being beaten. Reality, I think we have sticky core inflation. Food is still what, 9%? People are going, yeah, food inflation is coming down. Still 9% year on year, which when you compound it from when this started means we're probably 20, 25, 30% higher. Okay, there we go. So just to prove the point, okay, this was the weightings. I do like to show this. If we look at housing as a whole, right, in 2022, the weighting was 314 parts per thousand. Right now, February to December 303. So housing has actually come down in the whole CPI basket, but then within that housing, you've got utilities have gone up in weighting, and owner-occupied housing costs have come down in weighting. Okay, so just to prove that under the headline figures, there are skews in there. There is potential, not manipulation, but things have changed. The goalposts have changed to make it look more different. So first thing they're going to do is beat inflation, okay, or create the perception they've beaten inflation. The second thing they're going to want to do is to create the perception that they have increased people's affordability. So they've solved that cost of living crisis, okay? How are they going to do that? Well, the first thing they're going to do, is, if I can find it, so I'm slightly out of sync here. The first thing they're going to do is they've already done this, and they've gone for tax cuts in terms of national insurance. So this is an interesting tax cut, because on the face of it, a lot of people are going to go, look, we are going to be better off because of the reduction, 2p reduction in national insurance. However, mass media, brilliant, we're going to be better off. Reality, income tax is frozen. So income tax is frozen for several years now, and that's going to create something called fiscal drag. Now, what fiscal drag is as people's wages go up, income tax brackets stay the same, more people go into higher rate tax brackets, and that's actually going to end up costing them more in the long run. It's going to actually put a lot more money in the coffers for UK. So even though we've got this national insurance drop, headline, national insurance drop, tax brackets frozen. And by the way, I think when they say as a headline, income tax frozen, people have the perception it means that income tax isn't going to go up. Okay, just as a very brief, so we create these cognitive shortcuts, right? As humans beings in that brain, because we're bombarded with so much information every day, we create cognitive shortcuts where we will scan information and make an assumption based on the very small percentage of the actual information that we get. So when you hear a headline that says income tax frozen, people go, wait a minute, my income tax is frozen. Brilliant, we're doing even better. We're going to be even better off. But it's the income tax brackets which are frozen, which means as your nominal wages go up, because we're in strong nominal wage growth at the moment, more people are going to be dragged into higher rate tax brackets, which means their tax burden is going to get higher. And actually, we are now going into the highest tax regime since the Second World War in this country. If we have a look, this was posted by the Resolution Foundation, I saw today. For this next financial year, this is the net impact of the national insurance versus the 2024 threshold freeze. And if I draw in here, so the people who are worse off are people who are on about 25k or less in terms of average earnings. So the net impact is actually negative for this little cohort here, which is what, that's sort of like 16, 17,000 to 22, 23,000 as a net impact. And as you get further up the wealth or the income spectrum, you're going to be, doing slightly better. And the best people, or the people who are going to be most well off, are those on about £50,000 a year. Now that's of course this year. As we go into next year, and then the year after, and the year after that, with those income tax freezes, that's going to keep dragging people into higher rate tax brackets. So the numbers that were crunched show that over the next, I think it's the next 3 or 4 years, for every £1 saved on the national insurance reduction, 4 extra pounds are going to go into the income tax collections. Make that of what you will. But of course, the headlines are the perception of increased affordability. And of course, the perception of increased affordability is helped by nominal wage growth. So interestingly, this whole nominal wage growth metric, I also think will be used in the rhetoric as we move into the election time, because it's actually good for Tories. And we find ourselves in a funny place. I believe we find ourselves in a funny place that, let me just come over here. I'll come back to the energy price cap. They want to get the interest rates down, okay, or the government wants to get the interest rates down. For obvious reasons, they've got a huge huge debt burden that they're servicing. So interest rates coming down give them more money to play with. Of course, with inflation coming down rapidly, they can make the argument that interest rates can now come down, which is why we're seeing this big sort of disparity between the market makers, who are saying we're going to see 4 quarter point drops in 2024, versus Bank of England, who say we're going to be up here for ages. But of course, the government would like those interest rates to come down, because it's crucifying them in terms of servicing debt, but also it's crucifying them on the quantitative tightening schedule that the bank are doing, because the government has to offset the losses the Bank of England makes when selling their bonds off. Now, when I talk about getting interest rates down, this doesn't necessarily mean the Bank of England base rate. The market has actually done a huge job already of doing this. So if we actually look at the gilt yields, this is the 10-year gilt yield, you can see how much it's come down. So even over the last few months, we're kind of back to this level here now. And when we're doing things like selling off bonds, it's not actually the Bank of England base rate that's the most applicable thing here. It's going to be the gilt yields, or the bond yields. And with them dropping, that's actually saving the government a lot of money in that they're not spending anymore on covering the losses from the QT program. So the government wants interest rates to come down. Let's look at the swap rates, 5-year swap rate. Look at that, 3.3%. Very slightly more than it was just after Christmas, but 28th of November is 4.1%. So it came down the best part of 1% in a month. That's how aggressive the expectation of the interest rate cuts for this year are at the moment. So that's going to help them out. However, they don't want inflation. They probably want inflation to stay high. So if we find ourselves in an environment with higher than target inflation, but a lower interest rate regime, then that inflation is going to be eroding their debt. And also it's going to pull more people through fiscal drag into the higher rate income tax brackets. So is there a scenario here where we are artificially saying that inflation has come down, but the sort of systemic inflation is much higher than those headline CPI figures, which is actually a good thing for them if it keeps strong wage growth going, because the amount of extra income, and of course income tax is the largest sort of tax revenue that the UK government has, is going to create many billions a year in terms of fiscal drag. So that's an interesting thing to have a think about. So there we go. However, keeping inflation high without it looking high. So what does all this do on the property market? Okay, how is this going to affect the property market? Probably the final thing that they're going to start to bring policies out as we go into sort of spring budget, is the housing market, because it is an easy vote winner for them. Everybody loves houses, everybody loves housing, everybody wants to get on the ladder, and everybody then wants passive gains as the houses go up. So regardless of whether we think prices are going to go up or down in 2024, right, and we've always spoken about we're probably getting a very small decrease in nominal terms over this year, I would expect there to be some stimulus, if you like, as a last-ditch thrash to win votes as we go into budget in the spring. So they already started to implant those seeds for what are they going to do for first-time buyers. Are they going to bring Help to Buy back? Hopefully they do not, because that would be damaging. Are they going to sort of bring in much longer-term mortgages? Are they going to abolish stamp duty again? What is the stimulus? But we can almost, with certainty, know there will be something there in the next budget, okay? And whatever that does to the housing market will sort of wait to be seen. But we are now in a position where we are seeing market sentiment aggressively go. Interest rates are coming down. We are seeing, mortgages coming down in terms of the headline rates right now. Of course, this is totally irrelevant when you look at the amount of people who are still coming off their fixed rate cheap debt, right? Just because we've got some people on variable rates coming from like 6.5 down to 5.5 or something. You've got all the people who are on 1.5, 2.5 going up to 5.5, 6. So again, there's going to be a big disconnect between what's happening in reality and the narrative and the rhetoric that's going. But I foresee that there will be a sentiment shift. There will be a rabbit out the hat from the government in for the housing market. And you can almost see it now. You can almost see them trying to kickstart the property market to get more votes as we run into the election, which is going to do it damage. And then I would imagine if that happens, we'll probably see a bigger correction down the line in the 2, 3, 4 year time period. So interesting. We've got a lot of interesting things to talk about there. And before we do go over to Q&A, by the way, give me a thumbs up if that sort of stimulated some thoughts about where we might be going. Now that it might be completely way off. We never know. Here's some very finally some data on nationwide house price, which they snuck out just before Christmas, and not a huge amount to talk about in the nationwide HPI for December, other than the fact that again they basically just have all their BS figures, seasonally adjusted figures. So we got 0% monthly change seasonally adjusted, but of course when we look at the actual house price, it's gone from 258,557 to 257,443. I don't know why we even look at this anymore, guys. It just seems so irrelevant. The only graph I would like to look at is their actual chart, because we're still in a sideways, I would say, compression at the moment in terms of where their average house price in terms of nominal terms are. So we've got a base. We've touched it once. We've touched it twice. This baseline, about to touch it a third time. If we sort of go below that and break that, is that when the housing market starts to capitulate, or is it going to bounce off it? And are we going to see a spring bounce into this year with a massive, I would say, groundswell of public sentiment change as we go into Q1 this year? And don't forget Q1 2023. Try and get my years right. I almost said 2022 there. Q1 2023, we saw that groundswell in sentiment again. as the mortgage rates came down and we saw a pop of house prices. It's this pop here. This pop here was when the swap rates fell after the mini budget spike. I just wonder if we see it again, and we're just going to see effectively a sideways market for quite a while. Look, if it's going up or down 1%, 2% a year, it's kind of neither here nor there. For me, it's a sideways market, and we don't know which direction it's going to take. I would suggest the thing that's going to breach it is if we go into recession. Oh, that's the other thing. I almost forgot, actually. Sorry, just the final thing before I hand over to questions. That was the other thing they're probably going to be talking about, is the perception of the economy and growth. Because it is bizarre, right? When I saw an article just between Christmas and New Year, where all of a sudden we were going to be the second or third best performing economy in the G7 all of a sudden. And bearing in mind that just before Christmas, like literally a couple of days before Christmas, we had the revised GDP figures come out, which effectively showed that we've revised the last 2 quarters down. We've had a negative quarter and a level quarter, which technically means we're not in recession. And then October was minus 0.3%, and we're just obviously waiting for November and then December's figures. But if we look at this, so it doesn't matter how much we try and spin this. If we look at GDP per head for since the beginning of 2022, this is the thing that I think shows where we are as a country. Again, the nominal overall GDP is vaguely irrelevant because we've got an expanding population. The GDP per head is the thing we actually care about. Let me just try and lift that up so you can see the last one. It's just sort of, I'll hold it for you. On a quarter by quarter basis, 0.2, minus 0.2, minus 0.2, 0, 0.1, minus 0.1, minus 0.3 is our GDP per head, which for me seems pretty negative and weak. Not just weak, pretty abysmal, right? When we look at that, and if we charted that, we would see a negative trend. What do they call it? Negative growth. So we are seeing growth in the economy, but it's negative. So even though the headlines talk about we've got a strong economy, we're in growth, we're going to have a soft landing, we're going to outperform many of the other economies in 2024, that is not a strong economy, right? So the big thing for me, the big message that I want to take away, or everybody to take away from this, is the perception versus the reality. And I would suggest there's going to be quite a difference in perception to reality as we run into this election cycle. And please, if you do not think there are going to be psyops run against all of us in the mass media and social media and, YouTube sphere and everything, right? And this is there are teams of people who do this as a profession, right? Who are expert at influencing nations. And this is not difficult to do, right? Because we now live in such an interconnected society that they don't even have to just put stuff out. In fact, mainstream media is probably the safest of all of it, right? They just got their very obvious biases in mainstream media. It's actually social space, YouTube space, TikTok space, all of this sort of stuff, which for me is where the real danger is. Because all you need to do is plug in some contrasting, polarizing and damaging messaging structures through the influencer network, and all of a sudden you've got the ability to move entire generations of people very, very, very quickly. Okay, so I think that's something that we need to watch out for in this year. I think it's going to be fascinating as a year. So happy New Year, everybody. I hope that's not like too doom and gloom. Let's have a look at some of the questions, and we've got quite a few. Hello, Robert says, read a book called Mind. Is it actually called Mind hyphen Uck, or is it called Mindfucking? Didn't want to swear. Chris Wiley, Cambridge Analytics. Yeah, sounds good. Most councils will jack council. Oh, that's a good one. Let's put this one. Most councils will jack council taxes by the max in 24. So councils are all going bust. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen this on the news. I know some members of my council quite well in terms of housing, and we're having discussion probably almost 10 years ago now in housing, them talking about housing, the council's going bust. It will all get privatised and it will all cost us a lot more money than council tax. So that's interesting. Right, Jimmy, let's put a question. I've not read the question, but I saw you start with a question, so I will put it on and we'll talk about it. Charlie believes house price indices like Halifax Nationwide only show average transaction volumes and prices have fallen further due to fewer transactions in the lower market. Do you agree? So I don't disagree in the slightest, because we're in such a small data set. Even the indices themselves are saying there's such a small data set, the house price models they use, and if anybody doesn't know, it's called a hedonic regression model. The Halifax and the Nationwide is the same as the ONS. It's called a hedonic regression. There are differences in methodology between Halifax and the Nationwide, and the Halifax is most closely aligned in terms of the model with the ONS. Which is why I always generally think the Halifax is the more accurate of the two. Nationwide is a little bit of an outlier and generally comes in quite a lower value, but there has been quite a lot of divergence between the two over the last 2 or 3 years. They are just that. They are just they're models, and they're based on things which can skew them. So, for example, Halifax has a part of the model is price per square foot. Now, price per square foot can get skewed massively if you're doing smaller units. Generally, you'll find a price per square foot in smaller units. Not all the time. That's not generic everywhere, but in a lot of areas, the smaller, denser units, you're going to have higher price per square foot. The larger houses with much more sort of big open rooms, it's going to be a lower price per square foot, and so therefore differences if you've got a lot of first-time buyer things on the market. Or sorry, if the demand is in the first-time buyer area, where, for example, they're going to probably be smaller units, higher density units, probably higher price per square foot, that could put house price up. So if you remember when they were, let me just put back here, when we were over on the that little pop-up in sort of Q1 last year, I had a theory that I was talking about and going through the numbers that you're seeing a lot of activity in the first-time buyer market because the rents are going up so much. There's certain parts of the UK where it's still more affordable to buy than it is to rent, sort of basically north of the Midlands or Midlands and North. So if people are buying 1-bed flats, 2-bed flats, 2 up, 2 downs, generally price per square foot is going to be higher as an average when it goes into the model. That's going to show a boost in price per square foot into the model. It's going to show an uptick in house prices, even though it could be complete hoop that prices aren't actually coming up. So the models, I always say, I generally use these models as a talking point rather than any sort of accurate reference of what's going on. As a property investor who sort of looks at a lot of property, I can tell you that price reductions have been everywhere for a long time now. Certainly in the areas that I invest in, that's doesn't mean there aren't areas where the opposite is true. You can have micro economies all over, micro housing markets, and that's another thing that I think is really important to clarify, is that the UK is made up of lots of little micro housing markets. So London, for example, is going to be completely different to Birkenhead and Wallasey. Some of my old investment areas, they're just completely different sort of climates and economies, and you can't compare the two, and therefore an average model is just pretty unhelpful. So you need to really, when I teach this to my clients in Property Cashflow Accelerator, I talk about something called microscaping, which is we go through exercises and we actually dig down to almost street level and see how markets are performing based on various data analytics, heat maps, all that sort of stuff. Because you can even see micro markets within micro markets, right? Even like, you'd be in some towns or cities and just one road, on one side of a road, you can have a completely different market to the other side of the road as you sort of, have boundaries of different areas. So, I don't disagree at all with what Charlie's saying. I suspect that they have fallen further for no other reason than the ONS themselves say that they exclude below market value transactions, which by definition means it's skewed up to where it should be really. So yeah, I do agree. It's probably quite a long way of answering that question. Apologies. What else we got? Yeah, can't see. So Stafford says, can't see much more to come out of inflation at the moment for the next issue. Maybe a bit of petrol, household fuel up today. So let me just come up, because there's some other slides I didn't talk about. I'm just going to talk about the inflation issue, and let me just get it. There we go. Something I did want to mention was the price cap, utility price cap. For those who don't know, it's just gone up from today. So not a huge amount, but it has gone up. So a little bit of a kick in the teeth when wholesale. That's the wholesale gas chart as of today. So we're back below 80 pounds per therm. Now, we had a little spike up over the summer. The problem is with gas and electricity is the electricity or the energy companies don't buy on spot price, so they generally forward buy. So winter 2024, they're probably forward buying a year ago. But when you look at it like that, you go, wait a minute, if they were forward buying a year ago, right? They were forward buying here. So if they were forward buying for winter 24 there, why has the energy price cap gone up? And the honest answer is there probably was some buying, or that little spot price there. But I also read, and I didn't actually go any more into it than a very quick sort of skim over, that the energy price cap has gone up and it's been allowed to go up by Ofgem for the energy companies to recoup some of the money they're losing from people who are unable to pay their bills right now. And if that is true, okay, that is horrific. That has been allowed to happen, because number one, they're all posting massive windfall profits anyway. I don't see why they should be able to put the energy price cap up to basically take from everybody else who are paying their bills. But it says that is going to squeeze affordability a little bit over the winter. But also, there's a lot of people who can't pay the bills, which is something else to talk about. Now, if we go to the forecasts from Cornwall Insight. We're actually, so if you remember, let me just go back, sorry. So we've just gone up to 1928, 1928 is the price cap. I don't want to go into how price cap works right now. Just say that's 1928, it's gone up. Q2, right, is forecast to drop a lot. It's forecast to drop a huge amount. And then Q3 this year, it's going to drop even more. So we're the best part of 30% drop by Q3 this year. So bearing in mind that a big part of the original inflation was the energy spiking, which of course, by the way, is completely out of our control. Interest rates don't affect it, and now that it's come down, of course, the government are going, "Whoo, we've beaten it," but let's face it, they've had nothing to do with it. I would say we're going to see some sticky inflation. I've said it for a while, by the way, that we should. If you look at what happened in the rolling 12-month in December, January, Feb, so December 22, January, February 23, and you look at what was a very small, there wasn't a lot of month on month then. So unless we're seeing massive drop-offs now, we should see inflation stick, right? That should happen. If kind of logic dictates, I'm sure something will happen that none of us have seen, and it'll be manipulated to see another massive drop-off. But we should see some sticky inflation now for the next couple of months. But that's fine in terms of, let's just go how the government thinks about this. Because if we now go big drop off Q2, another drop off on Q3, right, and then we see that come out in the inflation, we see another big fall of inflation, is that the time they call an election, right? Is that when they go, inflation is now dropped off a cliff, it's summer, so everybody's in a better mood in the summer anyway, right? And the cost of living is definitely less of an issue in the summer when you're not paying out all that money on bills and all that sort of stuff. This is, of course, just totally hypothetical. So is that at the time that they call the election in Q3 of this year? I think they've got to do it by January something 2025. So you'd imagine it's not going to be done after Christmas. It's going to be done before Christmas. So is Q3 the time they call it? And of course, it actually, if inflation does drop off very quickly, or the perception of inflation drops off very quickly, and well, if that does happen, there's going to be two scenarios with interest rates. Number one is the market were right and called the banks bluff, and interest rates have come down. And if interest rates have started coming down and inflation comes down, right, is that the time the government goes, they come in on their horse as the white knights and they go, we've navigated the country through this crisis. Inflation is now down at 3% or whatever, right? Interest rates are coming down. Wages are going up. We're seeing growth even though we're not seeing growth. Look at what we've actually done to the economy, right? We've saved it. Now let's call an election. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is if inflation carries on coming down and the bank do dig their heels in and they don't drop interest rates, then actually the government has quite an easy them against us narrative to put out there. It's like, hey, look, we've done all that. We've saved the economy and we've brought inflation down. It's the bank that's keeping interest rates up that's hurting everybody, not us, because of course the bank's independent. So they can create a narrative that's quite compelling to actually polarize people towards them and go, oh, wait a minute, the government have done all this stuff and it's not their fault. The interest rate's still high and we're being hit with all this sort of stuff. So that's an interesting concept that might well play out. I don't know. Right. See if we've got any. I'm going to do one more question, team, and I've got to go. I'm going to see if we've got any questions. Interesting. I want to try and find a question. See if I can find one. Sorry, I know everybody's having a. Jimmy's got a question. Last question, then we're out of here, I'm afraid, guys. If you were a first-time buyer in the Northwest, currently renting for fairly cheap, would you be looking to buy Q1, Q2 this year, or would you sit it out for a little longer? By the fact you said first-time buyer, Jimmy, I assume, therefore, you're looking to buy to live in rather than as an investment property. So my views on this are pretty clear. I think if you're buying to live in, you should move based on your preference, to live somewhere you want to live. So if you are living somewhere you enjoy renting, right, and you're saving money, you can invest it somewhere else. Fantastic. If you need to live somewhere for a particular reason and you want to have the security of your own home, I wouldn't hold off buying. What I would do is I would make sure that I go in aggressively in my negotiations and get a good deal on something, because I do know there are fantastic deals out there in certain areas of the country. I know we've still got areas where prices are sticking high. We've got unrealistic vendors, but you will always find motivated sellers who you can do a deal on. So if I was buying for my own home, and by the way, I live in rental. This is a rental here. I'm in the basement of my rental property. I live in rental because all of my equity I put into my investment portfolio and grow and compound that. And then the investment portfolio, the rent roll from it, pays for my rent plus a lot more, which effectively means, live rent free, plus don't have to worry about the maintenance, all that sort of stuff. And of course, I'm still in property, so benefit from passive gains from property markets going up over the longer term. And please don't forget, everything we're talking about at the moment with market correction, we're talking a very small time frame in the zoomed out picture of property market cycles. Okay. What I will do, and I'm sorry, I know, Jimmy, I'm taking a long time to answer this, but it's important. So let me just find, I'm just going to Google it actually, rather than go into the slides. And then I'll put it on. This for me, and we're probably going to get an update on it pretty soon. Jim, I was going to take your question off so people can see. I've lost my cursor. No, multiple screen pigs. Sorry. Oh, why has it gone onto an advert? You can tell that I've been sourcing radiators for one of our projects. The Google retarget. Right. This for me is the most important chart. Most important, probably not the most important chart, because you've got to take it with a slight pinch of salt. This is the nationwide house price index adjusted for inflation. If I can zoom in on that a little bit. We are still 2023 Q3, so I'd imagine in a few days we'll get the update and get Q4 in, which I imagine we'll see another drop down, because of course we've still got inflation and the housing market has not been going up. You can see from here how far below we are the trend in real house prices. And this is a dynamic line, by the way. So it's not static. In terms of real terms, house prices are cheap right now, I believe. Again, we're talking averages. But on a macro level, we have to sometimes talk averages. So I believe they're cheap. Okay. Whenever things diverge from a line too far, it's in a free market economy, it should come back towards the line at some point. I'm not saying it will do. It should come back towards the line at some point. So actually, I suspect it will come down further in 2024. 100% I suspect it will come down further in 2024. But the housing market is not like the stock market. It's not like you're trying to make quick flips on averages or stock market prices. So you can't quite look at it. People go, oh, don't catch a falling knife, all that sort of stuff. Quite frankly, if you have an entry point here, and then over 10, 15, 20 years, right, it comes back in terms of this is real value, right? So you need to equate it to things like gold and, inflation, all that sort of stuff. They should become more valuable again in the future in terms of real value. So I personally think we're looking cheap. I think that's important as investors because you want an entry point that's cheap in terms of real. For your own house, I think it's less important because, of course, if you're buying now, if it goes down, yes, it can go down in value. But if yours is going down in value, then pretty much everybody else's around you is going down in value as well. If it goes up in value, it also doesn't really matter that much because everybody else is going up in value. So this is why I personally believe that your own home should never be viewed as a store of wealth at all, right? It is a house, it is a home, not a store of wealth, because relatively speaking, and of course you're going to have variations in region and areas and all that sort of stuff, but relatively speaking, markets will move up and down in the same. So you're not necessarily making wealth if you're in a rising tide, or losing wealth if it's going down, if that makes sense. I know that's probably not quite strictly technically true, but that's how I view your own thing, which is why, by the way, I don't own my own home as a matter of course, because there's lots of liabilities that come with owning your own home. If you look at your own home's value increase over time, and you go, yep, that's cool, right? So down here, let's go down here, right? It's gone up a lot. We're probably never going to see it go up that much again. Some, for mid 90s to sort of mid 2000s. Let's go here, which is more realistic. Okay, so let's go Q3 2013 up to where we were in the peak in 2022. Yes, your house has gone up. But over that period, you've had a cost of owning that house if you had a mortgage. So interest is a cost. So you've got to offset that. Then you've got to offset the costs of any maintenance, any work you've done. If you own a house every 5-10 years, you're going to be changing carpets. You're going to have boilers that go. So you have to put all of those costs in owning that property into the overall sort of figure. So it's a fallacy just looking at your house price. Let's say you bought it for 100 grand and 20 years later it's worth 250 grand. You cannot just look at it and go, I made 150 grand, because you didn't. Because if there's any cost of finance, that's eroded. If there's any maintenance or repairs or anything like that, that's eroded it. And you've also got to look at the value of that property in real terms. So there's lots of factors that go into this. So to answer the question, Jimmy, if I was looking to be buying somewhere right now, I would be looking, right? If you need to live somewhere, I would be looking to buy, but go in and be aggressive in your negotiations. That's my thoughts. Alternatively, if you're currently renting for fairly cheap, you might want to save up and reinvest it somewhere else. I don't know. Lots of things we can do with that. Cool. Right, I'm going to call it a day there, team. Just to let you know, if anybody is looking to get into investing this year or grow their investment portfolio, or looking to how to invest in 2024, I've decided to start running some live property training events. So they're going to be off YouTube for the main reason that they are more niche, don't appeal to everybody in the audience who watches these. So I'm going to be doing them off YouTube in sort of a webinar style format. If you'd like to sign up for that, this Thursday, 7:30, totally free, about an hour's worth of training, how to effectively start and grow a property business in 2024. And I'm going to be digging deep into the concept of the property unicorn, which is how to basically accelerate your property portfolios by buying smaller amounts of larger, more profitable, recession-proof, interest rate-proof properties than buying a whole massive bag of bolts in terms of a single let portfolio that doesn't really work and creaks and is going to be hit by tenant reform and interest rates and all that sort of stuff. So if you're interested in that, I will post a link straight after this in the comments. I'll put a pinned comment on this video as soon as I close this down. Feel free to click through, register, and I'll see you on Thursday. Otherwise, I hope you had a great Christmas, great New Year. I'm looking forward to working with you and continuing doing the show into 2024. And in the meantime, have an early night if you had a late one last night, and you're back at work tomorrow. So I'll see you later in the week.